Hold her hand tight, Oliver, because when I step onto that stage, you're going to need someone to pretend they still believe in you. Words cut through the ballroom like a blade, and Oliver's smile flickered for a second. Too small for the guests to notice, big enough for Claire to file away. She knew every tone of his voice. The wife trying to make conversation after a cold dinner, the wounded woman asking for respect, the weary tone of someone waiting for an explanation that never came. This was different. This tone asked for nothing. The sales group's 30th anniversary party glittered at the Ritz-Carlton, with towering chandeliers, waiters circulating with champagne flutes, and businessmen smiling, as if no smile there had a price tag. Claire Mitchell Stone walked in knowing she'd be humiliated before midnight. What Oliver didn't know was that she carried months of silence, documents hidden behind polite smiles, and a truth capable of turning that elegant night into the beginning of his downfall. Oliver came through the central door without hurry, too elegant, too vain, too cruel to fake an accident. Bianca walked beside him, a silver dress that seemed chosen to catch every flash. As they passed Claire, Oliver squeezed his mistress's hand and said, low enough for only her to hear, "You can still leave with some dignity, Claire." Bianca tilted her head and added, "Or you can stay and learn how a real woman stands beside a man like him." Claire held her glass without drinking. She didn't look at Bianca's dress first. She looked at Oliver's hand on her waist. Then she answered without raising her voice, with the words that would crack the night open. "Hold her hand tight, Oliver, because when I step onto that stage, you're going to need someone to pretend they still believe in you." The ballroom kept murmuring around them. Expensive perfumes, rehearsed laughter, a quartet playing near the balcony. Outside, New York City blinked in endless windows, as if the whole city were watching from behind the glass. Oliver leaned close to Claire's ear and whispered, "You don't have a stage tonight. This is my family's party, my company's party, my name's party." Claire finally took a small sip of water, not champagne. "Your name is on all the wrong places, Oliver." Bianca laughed, but her eyes searched his face. That was the first mistake. Guilty people always look for confirmation before they deny. Matthew Reed stood near the investor's table, glass in hand, gaze split between the stage and Claire. Oliver's best friend since college, best man at Siena, the wedding board partner, the man the Stone family presented as proof that the empire still had loyalty. That night, though, loyalty weighed like a poorly fitted chain. Claire passed him without touching him, but let her fingers brush for an instant the small dark pendant on her wrist. It wasn't a flashy piece of jewelry. A thin leather bracelet with a metal charm the size of a fingernail, too discreet to interest women who measured value in diamonds. Matthew saw the gesture and looked away toward the tech booth where a young man in a black shirt adjusted the microphones on the stage. Everything was ready. Almost everything. The problem was that Oliver seemed determined to destroy Claire ahead of schedule. And Claire, no matter how prepared she was still a woman listening to her husband parade her as a defeat in front of half of New York's elite. Oliver's mother, Helena Stone, approached with the rigid face of someone who knew how to smile without welcoming. She kissed the air beside Claire's cheek and murmured, "I asked you not to turn this night into a disgrace." Claire answered with the politeness she'd learned to use as a blade. "Good, Helena. So did I." The woman pressed her lips together, glancing at Bianca, who was already receiving greetings from two foreign partners as if she'd been officially introduced. "Oliver is going through a difficult phase. A man under pressure makes thoughtless gestures." Claire watched her husband place his hand on his mistress's bare back. Thoughtless gestures don't usually come with a named invitation, a dress chosen by an assistant, and a table reserved next to the family. Helena lost patience for half a second. "You've always been smart, Claire. Be smart now. Stay quiet." Claire looked toward the entrance of the ballroom, where business journalists were capturing footage for the next day's society notes. "I've been quiet for 3 months. What does that mean?" Claire smiled without joy. It means you mistook silence for obedience. The master of ceremonies announced the first part of the evening, and the ballroom moved like a trained body. Directors approached the stage. Photographers found better angles. Waiters collected empty glasses with the discretion of those who had seen many wealthy families rot under beautiful chandeliers. Oliver climbed the first 3 steps alongside Bianca, a move that wasn't in the official script. Claire knew, because she'd received a copy of the old script before being removed from the internal organizing list. In the original version, she was supposed to walk up beside her husband to thank the group's longtime employees. In Oliver's version, her name had vanished. He grabbed the microphone and smiled at the audience. Good evening. Tonight, the Stone Group celebrates 30 years of courage, expansion, and vision. Applause. We also celebrate a new phase, a phase where we need to leave behind symbols that no longer represent our future. A few guests discreetly turned their heads toward Claire. Matthew closed his eyes for a moment. Bianca lowered her head, feigning modesty, but her fingers curled around Oliver's arm like a signature. Claire felt the words land inside her. No blood, no scream, no spectacle. It was almost curious to discover that public humiliation could feel so silent within. Oliver continued, "My personal life has been the target of unfair comments these past weeks, but I believe transparency starts at home." The word transparency cut through Matthew like an insult. Claire noticed. Oliver raised Bianca's hand before the guests. Bianca Hart has been an important presence in this new chapter, including in institutional image projects that everyone will soon come to know. The ballroom stirred with a low murmur, half shock, half cowardly approval. Claire studied the thin ring on her finger. Too new, too expensive, paid for by whom? A photographer aimed his camera at Claire, perhaps hoping for tears. She turned her face just enough for the lens to capture her calm. That's when she saw the young man in the tech booth touch his earpiece and make a nearly invisible signal. 20 minutes to go. Only 20. Oliver stepped off the stage amid confused applause, some polite, some cowardly, and walked over to Claire with the satisfaction of a man who mistook humiliation for victory. "There," he said quietly. "Now you can leave." Claire looked at his hand, still intertwined with Bianca's. Then she looked at Matthew, who finally approached without hiding from anyone that he stood by her side. She handed her untouched glass to a waiter, touched the bracelet on her wrist, and felt the vibration confirming access was granted. "I'm not leaving," she said. "The next speech is mine." Matthew extended his hand to her in front of the entire ballroom. Claire accepted, crossing the bridge built over months in the dark. They walked up to the stage together. Claire stared at Oliver down below and said, "Good evening. Before dinner, the Stone Group needs to hear about transparency." The golden screen flickered and displayed "Special Compliance Report." Journalists raised their phones. Oliver shouted, "Cut that screen, now!" The screen blinked and returned to gold. Brief relief crossed his face. Claire didn't move. "Thank you for showing the board how you handle any attempt at internal oversight." Matthew took the microphone. "The request exists. It was filed according to the group's internal rules." Oliver changed tactics. "Matthew, I don't know what she promised you, but it's not too late to keep your hands clean." Elena Stone took control of the social situation, called for dinner, ordered the music lowered, and distributed smiles like bandages over an open fracture. Claire stepped off the stage under watchful eyes. An old director looked away. A businesswoman pretended to check her messages. A photographer captured her closeness to Matthew. In the side corridor, Claire heard whispers. "Revenge. Always been too close." Matthew said, "I should have spoken up more." "No," Claire replied. He needed to show everyone first how afraid he was. In the service corridor, the young man from the tech booth appeared with a tablet. "Mrs. Claire." They'd blocked the main mirroring, but the backup recorded the attempt to cut it. "Thank you, Diego. You saw nothing beyond your job." Matthew looked down the empty corridor. He'll go after everyone who helped. That's why we can't reveal everything yet, Claire said. Before we bring him down, we need to stop him from dragging innocents along. She returned to the ballroom to get her purse. Oliver was waiting for her without Bianca. You've lost your mind. Tomorrow everyone will know about this. Tomorrow everyone will pick a version, Claire replied. That's different. You think a few spreadsheets can compete with the stone name? They're not spreadsheets, she said. They're paths. Oliver lowered his voice, venomous. If you keep going, I'll make sure everyone believes you and Matthew planned this because you had something to hide. Claire looked at him. The man she'd shared 7 years of life with, 2 homes, a joint signature, an increasingly cold bed, and a collection of broken promises. You never could stand a woman who didn't cry on cue. The next morning arrived without mercy. Claire opened her eyes in her sister's small apartment in the West Village, her phone vibrating on the wooden table, and the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen. She didn't need to read much to understand what the world was saying about her. The first headlines mentioned a marital crisis at a corporate gala. Photos of Oliver and Bianca entering radiantly. Claire on stage beside Matthew. A headline hinting at a passionate dispute inside the Stone Group. Another headline already accused. Sources close to the family say Claire used inside information after being removed from the company's institutional life. She read it all without shedding a tear. Julia appeared at the door with her arms crossed. You want me to break something? Or make cheese bread? Claire took a deep breath. Today, cheese bread. Breaking things is what they expect of me. Her sister looked at her with concern. And what are you going to do? Claire touched the dark bracelet on her wrist. I'm going to let them feel safe for one more day. At the Stone Group building on Wall Street, security had received instructions before 9. Claire's badge was to be held until further notice. She arrived in light pants, a white shirt, and sunglasses. Supervisor Renato held the temporary card with sweating hands. Mrs. Claire, I received instructions. From whom? From the presidency. Claire didn't raise her voice. The presidency is under audit scrutiny. Renato turned red. I'm just following protocol. Then follow another one. Put in writing that my access was blocked after a formal audit request, with the time, the name of who ordered it, and your signature of receipt. The man hesitated. That could get me in trouble. Claire softened her voice, but not her tone. Not documenting it could get you in more trouble. It was then she realized the field had changed. The fight was no longer the party. It was the paper. Every block, every refusal, every bureaucratic silence, all of it could become evidence. Claire remembered the 3 months of silence, the documents hidden behind polite smiles, the truth capable of turning that elegant night into the beginning of Oliver's downfall. The thin leather bracelet with the metal piece, the size of a fingernail, vibrated against her wrist. Too discreet to interest women who measure value in diamonds, but it was she who held the access. Oliver didn't just want to betray her. He wanted to rewrite the story before she could tell it. The party, Bianca, the stage, all of it was an attempt to control the narrative. Claire had the backup recorded by the tech booth. Diego, the young man in the black shirt, had handed over proof of the attempt to cut the screen. The strategy was clear. Let Oliver believe he'd won, that the public humiliation had been enough, that Claire was isolated and defeated. Every move he made against her now was a record. Every blocking order, every threat, every attempt to silence her became part of the dossier. Question Claire still didn't answer. What exactly was in the special compliance report she'd been about to present? Matthew, on the other side of the city, was also preparing. Loyalty weighed like a poorly placed chain. Now he knew the friendship with Oliver had cost more than it was worth. The press was starting to dig. Business journalists who once expected a marital scene now investigated the internal audit and the minority shareholders. Claire's phone vibrated with a message from Matthew. He's moving the money. We need to act before he destroys the evidence. Claire replied slowly, weighing every word. No. Let him feel safe. Every step he takes now is a signature on his own sentence. She knew Oliver's fall wouldn't be a scream. It would be an audit read aloud before the same people who applauded him that night. The door of the small apartment in the West Village closed behind Claire. But the world outside no longer saw her as the betrayed wife. It saw a woman who stepped onto the stage and didn't tremble. The question was just what she was willing to sacrifice to prove she was right. Discovery didn't come from a complaint, an anonymous email, or a hired detective. It came from a forgotten spreadsheet on the home computer. Numbers that didn't add up. Transfers to companies Claire had never heard of, with names too clean, addresses that didn't exist. She didn't confront Oliver that night. She needed to understand the scale of the scheme before acting. Each week of silence was a week of gathering evidence. Each smile of his at the dinner table, each kiss on the forehead in the morning, each broken promise, all became a page of a dossier she built alone in the dark. Money didn't disappear by accident. It left the group's institutional image fund, passed through a consulting firm called Arco Norte, crossed a shell company, and ended up in personal payments. Oliver wasn't just betraying his wife. He was using the company's cash to buy his own lie. Bianca's image, the silver dress, the thin ring too new, her presence beside him on the stage. Claire's public humiliation wasn't a side effect. It was the final product. He needed the world to see the wife as the past, the mistress as the future, and the audit as the revenge of a resentful woman. Matthew entered the scheme by accident. Oliver asked him to sign an urgent document without reading it, as he did with everything that needed a trusted name beside his own. Matthew read it, and what he saw changed everything. The college friend, the best man at the wedding, the board partner, who carried loyalty like an ill-fitting chain, suddenly realized Oliver wasn't using him as a shield. He would use him as an accomplice, if allowed. He found Claire in secret at a discreet cafe, voice low and face pale. He's sinking the company. If we don't do something, we all go down with him. Claire replied, then we do it the right way. The plan took 3 months. 3 months of preparation against a single night of public exposure. Claire filed a formal request for an internal audit with minority shareholders, a legal, registered request within the company's rules. A special compliance report, the document she almost presented on stage, contains the full trail. Transfers, shell companies, payments to Bianca as an institutional image consultant, leather bracelet on her wrist, too discreet to interest women who measure worth in diamonds, holds the access key to the encrypted files. The vibration she felt at the party wasn't a nervous tick. It was confirmation that the system was unlocked. Claire knows she can't just leak everything. Oliver threatened to drag innocents down with him. Employees, directors, even Matthew. The damage containment strategy is delicate. Bring down Oliver without destroying the sales group, without tarnishing employees who knew nothing, without turning the audit into a weapon of personal revenge. Every move Claire makes must be clean. Every piece of evidence must come from a source his lawyers can't taint. The press is starting to sniff around. An economic columnist calls Claire. She doesn't answer. She lets the speculation grow, because every wrong story is more pressure on Oliver. Every distorted version forces him to explain himself, to lie more, to leave more tracks. Oliver, on the other side, acts with fury. He calls his lawyers, tries to block Claire's access to everything, sends threatening messages she saves as evidence. Helena tries to mediate, with the authority of someone who never learned to tell family from a courtroom. You've always been smart, Claire. Be smart now. Keep quiet. Claire answers without raising her voice. You've confused silence with obedience. The final battle will not be in the courts. It will be in public opinion, before the same people who watched the humiliation at the party. Claire understands this with cold clarity. The report can destroy Oliver, but it can also turn her into the villain of the story he's building. The betrayed wife, who used internal documents to avenge her wounded pride. The question she hasn't answered yet is how to use the weapon without becoming the narrative. How to prove the crime without looking like the criminal. Then the message comes. Matthew, across the city, writes just one line. He's moving assets offshore. We have 48 hours before the trail goes cold. Claire looks at the bracelet on her wrist, feels the vibration, confirming access is granted. The wait is over. The next move has to be hers. He, who had always known how to read others' silence, now faced a silence he couldn't decipher. The first gate closed, but it left a mark. Upstairs, in the glass-walled room where New York City seemed too small to threaten anyone, Allah gathered his allies. Bianca sat beside him. Two directors exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others, more cynical, almost enjoyed the audacity. On the table, coffee, water, tablets, and a draft statement. Oliver set the narrative with the precision of someone who'd already rehearsed it. Claire, emotionally shaken by the end of the marriage, tried to create instability using incomplete documents. Matthew overstepped out of old friendship with her, but he could still correct his position. A gray-haired advisor cleared your throat. What if an audit has been filed? Oliver shot him a cold look. Internal requests happen all the time. Not every request becomes a crisis. Bianca, unable to resist the feeling of power, leaned toward the table. The key is separating image from noise. An institutional image fund can cover the restructuring strategy. The silence that fell was short but dense. Oliver turned to her with barely contained rage. The expression on two directors' faces changed. Institutional image fund wasn't a term for a mistress to repeat in a crisis room. It was the second time Bianca had let slip a door that should have stayed closed. Matthew arrived late, no tie, as if he'd walked through the night without deciding whether he still belonged in that building. Oliver pointed to the empty chair. Sit down and sign. On the table, a statement of institutional alignment. The previous night's presentation had been the result of Claire's personal interpretation, without committee validation. Matthew read the first page, then the second. Everyone waited. His father surfaced in his memory like an old photograph. An honest man who lost his job after covering for his friend, the company owner, believing loyalty was a noble way to die. Matthew felt the weight of that inheritance in his fingers. Oliver noticed the delay. You owe me more than silence. Matthew looked up. I owe you many things. A signed lie isn't one of them. Bianca laughed nervously. Oliver pressed his hands on the table. Without my family, you'd be nobody in this market. Words cut through the room. Matthew closed the folder. Maybe. But without records, you won't be chairman for long either. He didn't sign, and by not signing, he became a target. That afternoon, Claire and Matthew met in a small room at a shared office near Wall Street, far from the floors where last names mattered more than contracts. The window faced tall buildings. Couriers cut through traffic below. The air conditioning made a constant, almost modest hum. Claire spread only the essentials on the table. Copies of protocols, records of blocked access, a sequence of payments, and the name of a consulting firm that appeared on event invoices, image campaign notes, and executive training receipts. They'll say, I stole this. Matthew placed his hands on the table. That's why every page needs to come from a source they can't taint. Claire nodded. Then she mentioned what she'd heard at the meeting. Bianca mentioned the image fund in front of two directors. Claire closed her eyes for a second. It wasn't pleasure, it was confirmation. She wants to be recognized as part of the power. She'll talk more. Matthew watched her with a pained respect. You knew Oliver would try to force me to sign? Claire answered without pride. I knew he'd try to turn your loyalty into handcuffs. It's what he does to everyone. At nightfall, Claire received a message from an unknown number. No greeting. Just one short sentence. Messieurs Claire, I'm sorry. I can't help anymore. They're saying I'm the one who leaked the files. Then, a blurry photo of a cardboard box on a work desk. It was Lucy, the accounting analyst who had first noticed the discrepancy in the payments. Claire felt her stomach clench. Matthew saw her face change and took the phone. They started with her. Claire walked to the window, watched the city light up in red lines of traffic. That was what Oliver did best when threatened. He picked someone smaller to bleed first. The first time since the party, the anger Claire had kept folded inside her nearly broke through. I should have said everything yesterday. Matthew stepped closer, but didn't touch her. If you'd spoken yesterday, Oliver would say, Lucy fabricated the data on your orders. Now we have the retaliation on record. Claire turned around. Her eyes were both wet and dry at once. She lost her job so I could have one more piece of evidence. Matthew Ice answered quietly, Then don't let it be in vain. That was exactly the problem. The more Bianca talked, the more dangerous Oliver became. Cornered men don't accept falling alone. That night, he sent the press an elegant, polished, venomous statement. The sales group reaffirmed its commitment to governance, lamented the undue exposure of private matters, and announced a temporary review of access for individuals connected to sensitive information. Claire's name didn't appear, but everyone knew how to read absences when they were written by lawyers. At Julia's apartment in the West Village, Claire followed the statement in the silence of the living room. The dark bracelet on the table, the coffee cup already cold. Matthew sent only one message. He's closing the doors. Claire replied, Let him. Closed doors also show who's locked inside. She turned off the screen, and for a few seconds, she let the betrayed, quiet woman exist before the strategist returned. It hurt. It hurt to know that the man who once promised to protect her now used his own empire to erase her. It hurt even more to know that many people would believe him. When Claire opened the audit file again, her face no longer trembled. Oliver had taken from her the stage, the badge, the reputation, and almost every visible ally. Still, he'd made the mistake of leaving tracks. And tracks, unlike applause, don't obey the name stone. The next morning, Claire understood that Oliver didn't just want to close doors. He wanted to erase the doorknobs. The sales group statement opened the business news with the cowardly elegance of lawyer-crafted sentences. Access review, institutional preservation, commitment to governance. But behind the scenes, the message was simpler and more brutal. Claire Mitchell Stone was being treated as a risk. She watched her own name be avoided on business programs, as if an absence could be more accusatory than a headline. Julia turned off the television before the reporter repeated the word crisis a third time. You're not going to eat, Julia said. Claire looked at the untouched plate. Lucy must be hearing this too. The analyst lost her job because she saw what she shouldn't have, and now they'll say, she made it all up because of me. Julia crossed her arms, outraged. Then release everything. Claire closed her eyes. It was what any fair person would say, see. It was also what Oliver expected. If I release it now, they'll burn Lucy, Diego, Matthew, and any employee who's touched a file. I need to prove the crime without handing over the people who tried to stop it. At the Wall Street building, Oliver managed the crisis like someone who still believed a glass table could hold up any lie. He called an extraordinary meeting with selected advisors, loyal directors, and 2 legal representatives who spoke little but wrote too much. Bianca shouldn't have been there, and precisely for that reason, she made sure to arrive before some of the executives. Light dress, thin folder in hand, the expression of someone who confused access with authority. Oliver noticed the uncomfortable looks, but he didn't send her away. He needed her visible to prove his choice was firm. He needed her close so he wouldn't admit that Claire's presence on that stage still rattled his ribs. Today, we end the noise, he said, without greeting anyone. Claire will be formally removed from any strategic environment. Matthew will be invited to correct his posture, and the public narrative will be handled by institutional image. One advisor asked cautiously, and the audit? Oliver pressed his hands on the table. An audit without control becomes a weapon, and I'm not handing a 30-year company to a resentful woman. Bianca smiled. It was small, but it was seen. Matthew arrived while the words still hung in the air. He heard resentful woman and felt a shame that wasn't his, but seemed to stick to his skin. The legal director pushed a draft toward him, now more aggressive than the first. The document stated that Matthew had been led by Claire to interpret financial records out of context, that he did not recognize the preliminary validity of the materials shown at the party, and that he regretted any damage caused to the family. Oliver didn't look at him like a friend. He looked at him like an owner. Sign it, and I'll forget your theatrics from yesterday. Matthew read the word led and almost laughed. There was no more precise humiliation than being treated like a child by a desperate man. You want me to say Claire manipulated documents that went through 3 levels of registration? Oliver leaned in. I want you to remember who opened doors for you in this market. The silence hurt more than the threat. Matthew thought of his father, the lost job, the sold house. The phrase he'd heard so many times, son, never confuse gratitude with servitude. He pushed the draft back. I remember, and precisely because I remember, I won't sign a lie. The refusal turned the meeting into a trial. An old advisor, a friend of Helena's, suggested temporary removal due to conflict of interest. Another implied that closeness to Claire compromised the audit's impartiality. Bianca, energized by the chance to seem strategic, added with venomous sweetness. Maybe the problem is less technical and more emotional. Everyone saw how he held her hand on stage. Matthew turned his head slowly. You should be careful with what you call technical. Yesterday you mentioned the institutional image fund as if you knew its structure. Bianca lost her composure. Oliver tells me about projects. Couples talk. Couples also sign invoices. The room went still. Oliver slapped his hand on the table. Enough. Matthew realized he'd struck too close to the truth. Claire was right. Bianca wanted recognition. She wanted to be seen as part of the power, and that hunger made her talk. The problem was that the more she talked, the more dangerous Oliver became. Cornered men don't accept falling alone, and Claire, across the city, knew the next victim already had a name. Lucy stared at Claire with eyes full of fear. You don't want the files? Claire shook her head slowly. I want you to stay clean. For the first time, Lucy cried. It wasn't relief. It was exhaustion. Mrs. Claire, people like us don't stay clean when people like them decide to get dirty. The meeting lasted no more than 20 minutes, but it was enough for Claire to confirm the worst. The retaliation against Lucy hadn't been improvised. Someone in finance had been ordered to review old access logs to find any small error, any delay, any justification for termination on grounds of breach of trust. Claire left the cafe with the name of a middle manager committed to memory and a heavy heart, because she couldn't promise immediate protection. On the sidewalk, traffic on Fifth Avenue crawled. Motorcycles weaved between cars. People with badges hurried past holding coffee cups. The city seemed indifferent to the moral collapse of any empire. Matthew called the moment she got into the rideshare car. They want to formally remove me. Claire watched her own reflection in the window. I figured. Bianca talked too much, but it's still not enough. He paused for a second. Claire, Oliver is going to use our closeness, she answered with bitter honesty. It scares me. But what scares me more is going back to being the quiet wife he thinks he killed. That night, Helena asked Claire to come to the family penthouse on Park Avenue. She didn't invite. She asked with the authority of someone who never learned to tell family apart from a courtroom. Claire almost refused, but she accepted. Some doors had to be seen from the inside before being closed forever. The penthouse was lit too brightly. White flower arrangements in the hall. The smell of polished wood that always felt like an attempt to perfume old secrets. Oliver wasn't in the living room when she arrived. Bianca was. Seated on the main sofa, legs crossed as if she'd already inherited even the silence of the house. Helena served coffee without asking if Claire wanted any. "You've crossed the line." Claire looked at the untouched cup. "You called me here to talk about lines with her sitting in my place?" Bianca smiled. "Your place?" What an old-fashioned phrase. Claire didn't answer her. Helena took a deep breath. "Oliver has made personal mistakes, but you're threatening an entire company." Claire kept her voice steady. "He used the company to cover personal and financial mistakes." Helena raised her chin. "You don't know what a family does to preserve a legacy." Claire finally met her mother-in-law's eyes. If a legacy needs fraud to survive, maybe it's already dead. Oliver appeared at the end of the sentence. No jacket, shirt open at the collar, barely hidden rage. "You came to insult my mother now?" Claire stood up. "I came to hear the offer." Helena hardened. Bianca looked at Oliver, surprised there was an offer. He walked over to Claire and handed her an envelope. "You sign a statement saying you acted out of marital distress. You hand over any copies of internal material, and I guarantee a discreet separation, apartment, alimony, silence. You walk away hurt, but you walk away rich." Claire looked at the envelope as if it were something too dirty to touch. "You still think my price is comfort?" Oliver lowered his voice. "Everyone has a price. You do. That's why you're confused." Bianca lost patience. "Just sign it. No one wants to see an abandoned woman pretending she's become a governance hero." Claire turned to her calmly. "Bianca, do you really want me to sign? If I sign, Oliver can still choose who to blame when things get worse. And guess which name he'll offer up first." The words cracked Bianca's confidence for an instant. She looked at Oliver, waiting for a quick, passionate, public denial. He didn't give one. He was too busy hating Claire. Helena noticed the silence and understood that the mistress useful for wounding her daughter-in-law could become an unstable piece. Claire filed away that reaction. It wasn't the fall yet. It was a crack. Oliver stepped closer, invading space that had once been intimate and now felt like a threat. "You'll regret this." Claire held his gaze. "I already regret it, for mistaking your ambition for courage." He raised the envelope again. "Last chance." Claire took the paper, tore only the first page in half, and let the pieces fall on the coffee table. She didn't tear it all. Documents were trails, and she'd learned to respect even her enemies' trails. "Keep the rest. You'll need to explain who drafted it." Helena stood up. "Claire, stop before there's no turning back." Claire walked toward the door. "Helena, the turning back ended when you asked me for silence instead of truth." Outside the penthouse, Matthew was waiting across the street, leaning against a dark car. No driver, no protection. Without his usual director's armor, Claire stopped when she saw him. "You shouldn't be here." He crossed carefully. "I know." "Then why did you come?" Matthew looked at the lit building behind her. "Because I know Oliver, and because I know the look on his face when he decides to destroy someone." The concern should have comforted her. But at that moment, Claire only felt the weight of another man deciding to be close when the damage was already done. "Matthew, I can't become a story about you saving me." He received the words as they deserved. No immediate defense. "I didn't come to save you. I came to tell you they've scheduled a formal board meeting for the day after tomorrow. They're going to try to strip you of any representative role and remove me from the committee." Claire breathed in, watching the car lights pass along the elegant street. "So he wants to legitimize the lie before the audit is finished." "Yes. And you, Matthew?" He paused. I'm scared. His honesty made her actually look at him. Of losing everything, of repeating my father, of staying silent too long and speaking when the damage is already done. It was the first time Matthew had opened the wound without polishing it. Claire saw something in him different from the public image of the loyal friend and the upright executive. She saw a boy who'd learned that the truth could arrive late and still destroy a house. For an instant, her anger softened, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because pain recognized pain without asking permission. You stayed silent for too long. I know, and it left me alone. I know. Don't say you know. Like that fixes it. It doesn't. Matthew lowered his head. It doesn't. That's why I'm going to bring to the board the record of the attempt to force me to sign that false statement. Claire felt the impact. If you do that, Oliver will say you fabricated it to protect me. You'll probably lose your position, your name, your access. Matthew answered quietly, maybe. Claire looked at him, too tired to admire courage without cost. Don't do this for me, Matthew. He answered without hesitation. It's not for you. It's because I spent years calling cowardice prudence. The board meeting happened 2 days later, in a smaller auditorium at the sales group building. No press, no music, no chandeliers, but with a cleaner violence. Claire entered accompanied only by her lawyer and Matthew, who had already received his notice of preventive suspension. Oliver seemed too calm. Bianca wasn't in the room. Someone had finally understood the risk of her vanity. Helena sat at the back. No formal voting rights, but enough influence to weigh like an extra chair. The board chairman opened the session with neutral words. Oliver asked to speak next, and presented a perfect narrative. Claire listened without interrupting. When her turn came, she could have thrown everything she had onto the table. She could have destroyed his voice before the morning was over. But the bank confirmation from the shell consulting firm still hadn't arrived. Without it, Oliver would sacrifice Lucy and Diego. Claire made the most painful choice. She didn't fully defend herself. She presented only the protocols, the existence of the audit request, and the record of access being blocked after the party. It was enough to stop them from calling her a criminal. It wasn't enough to clear her name. Oliver noticed her restraint and smiled with poisonous relief. As everyone can see, there's resentment and speculation, but no conclusive proof. The board decided to open an internal review. They removed Claire from any representative role until the process concluded. They suspended Matthew from the committee for conflict of interest. The decision landed with the coldness of a stamp. Claire felt the ground disappear beneath her, but she signed the receipt without trembling. Outside the room, in the glass corridor, Matthew said, "You had more." Claire answered with a hoarse voice, "If I'd used it now, they'd destroy Lucy before lunch." Matthew insisted, "You let them win today." Claire looked at the city below, immense and indifferent, "No, I let them believe that." But for the first time, even she didn't know if the difference would still be enough. That night, the news sites published the decision as a defeat. Claire Mitchell Stone removed from representative functions. Matthew Reed suspended from the committee. Oliver appeared in an old photo, smiling in front of the group's logo with a caption about stability. At Julia's apartment, Claire read every article in silence. She didn't cry in front of her sister. She didn't cry when Lucy sent just one message with the word "thank you." She didn't cry when Matthew sent the audio recording of the meeting where Oliver had tried to force him to sign the lie. Claire only cried when she opened an old folder on her computer and found a photo from the first year of marriage. Oliver asleep on the sofa with a report on his chest, before he learned to turn numbers into hiding places. The pain didn't come only from betrayal. It came from realizing that maybe she had loved a version of him that had died slowly. Claire closed the photo and opened the audit folder. The bank confirmation still hadn't arrived. Bianca still hadn't made her final mistake. Oliver still smiled at the world, and Claire, officially erased, needed to survive a little longer in the dark. The invitation to the launch of the sales group's new strategy arrived in Claire's email at 10 in the morning. Her name was absent from the official guest list. That was how Oliver liked to win. He excluded a person from the room, but made sure she knew what she was missing. The event would take place at the same Ritz-Carlton hotel where he had humiliated her, only now with fewer family members and more investors, consultants, financial press, and bank representatives. Claire read the message twice, noting the carefully optimistic tone of the text. Repositioning, governance, future, trust, words too clean for dirty hands. Julia, sitting across the kitchen table, asked, "Are you going?" Claire closed the laptop slowly. "I wasn't invited," Julia insisted. "That never answered my question." Claire touched the dark bracelet on her wrist, the same one everyone had mistaken for a discreet reminder of an elegant woman. "I'm going." Julia took a deep breath. As a wife, an ex-wife, or a ghost? Claire looked at the city through the window, as someone they'd had 3 months to listen to, and chose to silence. Matthew met Claire late in the afternoon in an underground parking lot near Fifth Avenue, far from the gleaming glass where the sales name still seemed untouchable. He carried a black folder, a tired face, and a serenity that hadn't existed before the fall. The bank confirmation arrived. Claire didn't take the folder immediately. For 3 seconds, she just listened to the distant noise of cars above their heads, the city passing over them, unaware that an entire family was about to lose its mask. From the account linked to the Arco Norte consulting firm, 3 transfers left the institutional image fund, passed through the shell company, and ended in personal payments. The final proof. But Claire was officially removed, Matthew suspended, and the launch event was approaching. How to use it without becoming the villain of the narrative Oliver had built. Oliver arrived at the hotel before everyone else. He needed to feel that the stage was still his. The technical team that night answered to a new events director, chosen hastily after what had happened at the previous party. Bianca appeared shortly after, less luminous than on the first night, but still stubborn in her need to seem indispensable. Oliver pulled her aside. "Tonight you don't improvise. No comments on funds, no comments on contracts, no answers to journalists. Smile and stay close." Bianca felt the blow to her pride. "When it was time to humiliate your wife, my presence was useful." He squeezed her arm hard enough to scare her, but not enough to leave a mark. Claire is finished because she didn't know her place. Don't make the same mistake. She understood then, in that grip, that maybe she had never been chosen out of love. She had been chosen for convenience. The ballroom filled by 7. Champagne and more coffee. Less laughter. More phones. The financial press occupied an entire side, hungry for any sign that the internal crisis was bigger than the official statement. At 7:30, Oliver took the stage, immaculate in a dark blue suit. The sales group was born from courage and will navigate this moment with responsibility. The screen behind him showed smooth graphics, projects, offices, smiling employees. That's when the side door opened. Claire entered without hurry, a simple black dress, no large jewelry. Beside her, Matthew carried a folder. A murmur rippled through the chairs before Oliver noticed. When he saw the two of them, his voice faltered on the word trust. Helena stood up first. Bianca stood up second. By reflex, unsure whether to advance or flee, Oliver tried to regain control. "This is a private event." Claire walked to the front row, where 2 independent board members stood to receive her. The gesture killed half of his arrogance. The board chairman took a side microphone with the formality of someone who knew every syllable could be quoted. "Mrs. Claire Mitchell Stone is present as a representative designated by a group of minority shareholders to make a statement related to the special compliance process. Oliver stepped down one level. This is absurd. She's been removed, Claire answered, without raising her voice. I was removed from the institutional image you tried to use as a curtain. I was not removed from the rights attached to the shares you forgot to respect. Matthew opened the folder. I was suspended from the committee after refusing to sign a false statement. The suspension doesn't erase the record of the attempt. The screen behind Oliver changed without asking permission. A timeline. 3 months ago, the audit protocol. 2 weeks later, the first inconsistency in a consulting invoice. On the night of the party, the screen lock requested by Oliver. The next day, Claire's access restriction. Then, Lucy's termination. Finally, the attempted statement against Matthew. Claire took the microphone. I didn't come to talk about marital betrayal. That would be too small for the damage this group went nearly transferred onto honest employees, shareholders, and suppliers. The journalist leaned in. Bianca lost her color when she realized Claire wouldn't start with her. For 3 months, I waited for the presidency to allow a clean investigation. Instead, my access was blocked. An employee was punished, and a personal narrative was used to discredit technical records. The question now isn't who was abandoned. The question is who was being paid to maintain a lie. Matthew projected the payments to the Arco Norte consulting firm. Image campaigns, training, corporate events. Amounts broken into smaller installments. Invoices with generic descriptions. Dates close to Oliver and Bianca's personal events. Oliver raised his voice. This is a sequence of manipulated coincidences. Claire nodded, as if she'd expected exactly that. That's why I didn't bring just the sequence. Matthew displayed the authentication record linked to Claire's bracelet. She explained, with the calm of someone who had rehearsed every word. This piece, which many call jewelry, holds a validation key. It doesn't contain stolen files. It contains the record of when each document was received, through which authorized channel, and with which system signature. The director asked almost involuntarily, "You used the group's own integrity procedure?" Claire looked at Oliver. "I did. It was created when he still pretended to believe in governance." The ballroom didn't laugh. It was too grave for laughter. But the words cut deep. Oliver attacked the weakest link. The terminated analyst isn't here to confirm anything. Convenient. Claire kept her voice controlled. She's not here because she was intimidated after warning about the duplication. And she doesn't need to be, because the bank confirmation came from an independent source and protects her name. Matthew showed the next page. The transfers didn't mention feelings, lovers, or gossip. They cited dates, accounts, beneficiaries, receipts. The Institutional Image Fund paid Arco Norte. Arco Norte transferred amounts to an intermediary. The intermediary covered personal expenses linked to Bianca Hart and an apartment in the West Village. Bianca stood up suddenly. I didn't know where that money came from. Worst possible sentence. Oliver turned to her with hatred. Helena closed her eyes. Claire let the silence do the work. What money, Bianca? The mistress opened her mouth but found no way out. Until then, no one had claimed in front of her that specific money had paid for something of hers. She herself had just confirmed she knew about the money. The ballroom became a restless organism. Reporters typed. Advisors whispered. Lawyers asked for breaks no one granted. Oliver lost his mask. You set this up to destroy me. Claire stepped off the stage and stood before him. No, Oliver. I set this up to stop you from destroying more people in my name. He laughed hoarsely. You think you're a saint? No. I was a coward for too long. I tried to save a version of you that no longer existed. That was my mistake. Confession disarmed even those who wanted to hate her. Matthew played the audio from the meeting where Oliver had tried to force him to sign the false statement. I took too long to speak because I confused loyalty with debt. Today I hand over this recording and accept the consequences of my delay. Oliver's recorded voice filled the ballroom. You owe me more than silence. Helena pressed a hand to her chest. The board chairman requested a temporary suspension of the presentation and called the members to an emergency deliberation in an adjacent room. Oliver tried to follow. Two legal representatives blocked his entry. The first door in history that closed in front of him, not Claire. Bianca was left alone in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by looks that once envied her dress and now calculated her legal usefulness. She approached Oliver, almost pleading. You said everything was covered. Claire heard it. Everyone nearby heard it. Oliver whispered, Shut up. Too late. Matthew asked that the statement be recorded by the board's officials. Bianca realized Oliver wouldn't save her. I didn't sign alone. Her voice broke. Oliver turned with violence in his eyes. Claire replied, calm. I think for the first time she knows exactly what she's saying. The board returned. The decision wasn't a final sentence, but it was a fall. Oliver Stone immediately removed from the executive presidency. Accounts linked to the Institutional Image Fund frozen. Lucy's dismissal reevaluated as protected cooperation. Matthew remained barred from voting on the committee due to formal conflict. But the recording was incorporated into the proceedings. Claire reinstated as shareholder representative with accompanied and documented access. The reading was dry, almost bureaucratic. That's why it was devastating. Oliver looked around, searching for an old ally, a friendly advisor, a mother capable of bending the world, a mistress willing to lie. He found closed faces. Helena remained seated, motionless, as if she had aged 10 years since the start of the night. Claire didn't smile. Victory, when it comes late, doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like air arriving after a long time underwater. The cameras found her before she reached the door. A wall of microphones, a chorus of overlapping questions about the betrayal, about the separation, about whether Matthew was more than an ally, about whether Bianca would face charges. Claire stopped. Matthew stood 2 steps behind her, close enough to be present, far enough to leave the frame entirely to her. My personal life will not be used to hide a governance failure, she said. What needs to be investigated will be investigated. Employees who acted correctly will not be treated as shields, and I won't turn private pain into a spectacle to make things easier for a man who confused the company with personal property. A reporter asked if she felt vindicated. Claire thought of Lucy, unemployed, of Diego, scared in a service corridor, of Julia, faking courage over coffee in a small kitchen, of herself, staring at an old wedding photo. Vengeance is small, she said. Accountability is harder. Matthew heard that, and something in him understood that whatever he felt for her would have to be borne kneeling before respect, not standing in the shadow of opportunity. Oliver waited near the side corridor, far from the cameras. He had lost the posture of the man who commanded the stage hours earlier. You destroyed me. Claire stopped. You started alone. He laughed without strength. Going to pretend you didn't enjoy it? The question touched something ugly in her, a part that maybe wanted to see him beg. But she wouldn't let Oliver choose the shape of victory. I enjoyed seeing Lucy protected. I enjoyed seeing Matthew stop lying to himself. I enjoyed seeing the board work because it was forced to. Seeing you fall on Oliver, that I don't enjoy. I'm sorry. That wounded him more than any insult. You still think you're better than me? No, she said. I just decided not to become worse because of you. Behind him, Bianca sobbed on the phone. No pose, no audience. And Oliver understood in that moment that being feared wasn't the same as being loved, and that Claire hadn't stepped onto that stage to take his place. She stepped up to take away his right to use everyone as a stepping stone. Outside the hotel, the New York night smelled of hot asphalt and distant rain. Claire left without haste, ignoring the flashes that still tried to turn dignity into a headline. Matthew walked beside her, keeping the exact distance of a man who had learned late, but had learned. "Got what you wanted?" She looked at the cars on the street, the lit buildings, the city where so many empires seemed eternal until someone opened the right spreadsheet. "I got a part." "The hardest part?" She shook her head. "No. The hardest part begins when there's no stage." He accepted the phrase as a fair verdict. "I'll testify about everything, including my delay." Claire finally looked at him, with less hardness, but without promise. "Do it for yourself. Not for me." He nodded. Inside the hotel, Oliver was still trying to understand what remained of the stone name. Outside, Claire breathed for the first time without expecting humiliation. New York dawned without mercy. Traffic jammed on Wall Street. Executives entered glass towers with coffee cups. Elevators rose full of people pretending. They hadn't read the headlines on their phones. Stone Group removes executive president after special audit. Claire Mitchell Stone returns as minority shareholder representative. Bianca Hart cited in payment under investigation. None of them said what Claire felt. Waking up on her sister's couch, the same black dress from the previous night folded over a chair, the dark leather bracelet on the table. Julia opened the window. "Coffee?" Claire said yes, but took a while to drink it. Victory tasted strange, dense, almost bitter, like coffee brewed too strong. She had protected Lucy, exposed the fraud, prevented Oliver from using pain as a smokescreen. And still, inside her, there was a vast silence where a marriage used to exist. Julia sat beside her. "You don't have to celebrate today." Claire stared at the cup. "I know. I just need not to fall apart." At the stone building, the board's emergency meeting began before 9. Oliver arrived flanked by 2 lawyers, without Bianca, without a smile, without the air of absolute ownership that used to open doors before his hand touched the handle. For the first time, security asked him to wait for authorization. A small pause in the corridor, more humiliating than any headline. Helena arrived shortly after, sunglasses, too large for an indoor setting. She didn't embrace her son. She just stood beside him, rigid, as if affection also required deliberation. Inside, the board chairman read the provisional measures. Total removal of Oliver from management, freezing of signing powers, external review of contracts linked to the Institutional Image Fund, notification of the competent authorities. Oliver tried to speak of legacy, of pressure, of decisions made to preserve jobs. An advisor cut him off with exhaustion. "Preserving jobs doesn't require an apartment on Park Avenue for your mistress." The sentence landed dryly. Oliver looked at his mother, expecting defense. Helena looked away. Bianca discovered she wasn't loved at the exact moment she needed protection. Called to give statements in a smaller room, before lawyers, board representatives, and an external consultant who didn't smile. She tried to start by saying she trusted Oliver, that she didn't understand contracts, that she only received gifts from a man in love. The consultant placed on the table copies of messages, payment receipts, and 2 notes in which Bianca had authorized personal image services, as if they were corporate actions. Bianca's composure crumbled slowly. Her chin hardened, her voice thinned. Tears filled her eyes, tears that moved no one. He said it was common, said everyone did it. The consultant asked if she had proof of that instruction. Bianca looked at her own phone like someone staring at a dangerous animal. She had audios, messages, fear, and rage at being left alone. That afternoon, she handed over part of what she knew. Not out of noble remorse, because she finally understood that Oliver would choose her as a sacrifice if it bought him one more day of power. 2 days later, Claire returned to the Wall Street building. She didn't try to use the old badge. She received provisional access, accompanied with entry time, hour, and purpose registered. Renato, The supervisor, who had been forced to block her passage, stood up with embarrassment. "Mrs. Stone," I wanted to say, "I registered everything, exactly as you asked." Claire smiled slightly. "I know. That rare card helped." The man seemed to breathe for the first time that morning. In the elevator, Claire saw her reflection in the polished steel and barely recognized the woman there. She didn't look triumphant. She looked older, more whole, less willing to ask permission to exist. In the audit room, she found Lucy seated before a table, a labor lawyer beside her, red eyes. The company would review the dismissal and guarantee protection against retaliation. Lucy stood when she saw Claire. "You didn't have to wait for me." Claire took her hands. "Yes, I did. A truth that uses an innocent person as a stepping stone is born dirty." Lucy cried in silence. Claire almost cried too, but breathed until the pain became firmness. Matthew kept his promise without asking for applause. He delivered a complete testimony, acknowledged that he had noticed signs of irregularity before acting formally, accepted suspension while his conduct was reviewed. To many, that sounded like a fall. To him, it was the first night in years he could sleep without hearing his father's voice saying that silence charges interest. He found Claire that evening in a small cafe near Fifth Avenue, far from the rooms where both had lost versions of themselves. No briefcase, no immaculate suit, just a light shirt and the face of a man who had finally stopped hiding behind competence. "I resigned from the executive position," he said. Claire looked up. "You didn't have to do that to prove anything to me." "I know. I did it because I couldn't keep sitting in a chair built on my delay. Now I answer to the internal process, cooperate with the external audit, and find out who I am when I'm not paying other people's emotional debts." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "That's the first answer of yours that doesn't try to convince me of anything." The meeting with Oliver happened at the old penthouse on a gray afternoon when rain threatened New York without deciding. Claire came to collect personal documents, some books, a box of her mother's letters. She didn't want jewelry bought after arguments. Paintings, chosen decorators' furniture that gave the apartment beauty without memory. Oliver was in the living room, thinner, unshaven, holding a glass of water he didn't drink. "You said you were coming. I thought it was better not to seem like an invasion." The irony passed between them without laughter. Claire walked to the shelf and took the small box. Oliver watched her like a man trying to find the old wife, hidden in her gestures. Bianca handed over messages. "I imagined she's going to say I used her, and I did." Claire finally looked at him. "It wasn't simple when I cried alone. It wasn't simple when you called me resentful. It wasn't simple when Lucy lost her job. Simple was the story you told to survive." Oliver sat down, defeated in a way Claire had never imagined seeing. For years, he had confused movement with greatness. Now he looked small in a room too large. "At first, I just wanted to cover a hole," he confessed. "A project went wrong. I thought I'd recover it by the next quarter. Then came another adjustment, another contract, another lie. By the time I realized, I needed everyone to believe I was in control." Claire watched without interrupting. Part of her recognized the ambitious young man who once slept over reports, trying to prove to his father he deserved the name. Another part remembered his hand holding Bianca's in front of the guests. "And me?" Oliver raised his face. "You saw too much, even silent. Around you, I felt exposed. An answer too honest to comfort." Claire gripped her bag strap. "So you tried to make me smaller until I fit inside your line." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." For a long time, Claire had imagined these words would free her. She discovered they didn't. Freedom had come earlier when she stopped waiting for them. Helena appeared in the corridor as Claire prepared to leave. No pearls, no impeccable makeup, no matriarch posture that turned any room into a tribunal. Just an old woman, too old to admit she had helped raise a son incapable of losing. "Claire," I wanted to say I was wrong. Claire held the box against her chest. You were wrong when you asked me to stay quiet. Helena nodded. I spent my life believing that preserving the family meant preserving the name. Yesterday I understood, too late, that maybe I only preserved pride. Claire didn't answer immediately. A cruelly human part of her wanted to see her mother-in-law suffer more, hear more, beg more. But that part belonged to the house she was leaving. I can't heal you from what you chose not to see. But I hope you look now, Helena cried without sound. Claire didn't embrace her. She also didn't wound her. Sometimes, dignity is leaving without destroying what is already cracked. The following weeks changed the rhythm of the Stone Group. The external audit advanced slowly, contract by contract. They suspended agreements, reviewed accounts, removed executives who once seemed untouchable. The building on Wall Street still stood, but something inside it had broken for good. Lucy was reinstated, but she chose another area, far from the corridors where fear still echoed. Diego, the technician from the first party, received formal protection. He kept working, with a proud shyness whenever Claire passed by. Bianca agreed to cooperate. In exchange, she would answer only within the limits of her own participation. She lost the social shine she had wanted so badly. The invitations vanished. The wine-glass friends disappeared. She learned, in the coldest possible way, that the elite who had applauded her beside Oliver never considered her one of them. Oliver faced internal procedures and legal consequences still underway. He wasn't dragged by police in front of cameras. There was no cheap spectacle. There was something worse for him: invisibility. Claire understood that the real fall wasn't the scandal. It was irrelevance. Men who confused power with identity don't survive silence. Claire stayed with Julia for a few more weeks. But living in the West Village began to feel confining. It wasn't a lack of space. It was because life there had become a waiting game, and Claire didn't want to wait anymore. She had lunch with Lucy at a simple restaurant downtown. Lucy spoke little of the past, much of the future. She said she wanted to sleep without nightmares again. Claire answered that this wasn't asking for too much. Lucy then asked if she regretted having waited so long. Claire thought for a long time before answering. I waited because I needed to be sure. Certainty isn't impatience. It's the opposite. Matthew rebuilt his life outside the group. He worked as an independent consultant, wrote about corporate governance, gave lectures at business schools on the cost of silence. He and Claire met from time to time for coffee. The friendship existed, but with the distance of those who learned that closeness must be earned, not inherited. In one of those conversations, Matthew asked if she had thought about returning to the group. Claire answered that she thought about returning to herself. The group, she said, was only the place where she discovered she had disappeared. Claire began to write. Not a book about Oliver, not a manual of revenge, a diary that became an essay about what she learned, about the price of silence, about the difference between loyalties and servitude, about the courage of speaking late. Julia read the first drafts and said it wasn't about him. It was about her. Claire agreed. It took time to understand. She revisited the photo from the first year of marriage, Oliver sleeping on the sofa, with a report on his chest. This time, she felt something different. Not anger, not longing, just the understanding that she had loved a version that died slowly. She kept the photo, not in a box, but in an album she began to build with new images. Her sister, morning coffee, the city seen from the window in the West Village. The dark bracelet on her wrist stopped being a weapon. It became a reminder that she survived her own fear. On a Sunday morning, Claire woke before sunrise. She sat in the balcony of Julia's apartment and watched the city wake up. For the first time in years, there was nothing she needed to prove. No battle to win. No name to clear. Life after the fall wasn't a heroic restart. It was a routine built slowly. Coffee, Work, walks, conversations with her sister, silences that no longer hurt. Claire realized that the real victory wasn't bringing down Oliver, it was not becoming him. Not learning to use people as stepping stones. Not confusing power with identity. Not losing the ability to feel pain in the face of destruction. Matthew sent a message asking if she wanted to join him at a lecture on governance. Claire thanked him, but declined. She no longer needed to be on a stage to exist. She began working as an independent consultant for small family businesses. She helped other women identify signs of fraud and build internal audit processes. It wasn't revenge, it was prevention. Lucy, now in a more secure position, recommended Claire to an NGO that supported victims of corporate fraud. Claire accepted without hesitation. It was the place where her story could serve someone. At an NGO meeting, a younger woman asked how she found the courage to face her own husband. Claire thought for a moment. "I didn't find courage," she replied. "I found a question that wouldn't let me sleep. If I didn't speak, who would speak for me?" The woman wrote down the phrase. Claire realized that her story now belonged to other people, and that was more liberating than any victory on stage. Claire returned to the Ritz-Carlton only once, months later, for a charity event. The ballroom was different. The lighting had changed. The stage seemed smaller. She walked through the space without fear, without resentment, only with the strange feeling that that place no longer defined her. At the end of the night, she met the board chairman, who presided over the session. He greeted her with respect, said she did what many wouldn't have the courage to do. Claire replied that she did what needed to be done. The courage came after. The story didn't end with Oliver's fall. It ended with her learning to live without needing to prove anything to anyone. On a Monday morning, Claire received a message from Renato, the security supervisor. He was thanking her, said she taught him that documenting is a form of protection. Claire read the message twice and smiled. The effect of her courage was spreading in small waves she never imagined. She replied with advice that was also for herself. "Thank you, Renato. Keep documenting." The sales group, under new interim leadership, published a quarterly transparency report. Claire didn't appear in the pages, but she knew that every clean number was a small, silent victory. Claire began writing a new essay, not about the fall, about what comes after, about how to rebuild a life when the enemy is no longer there to define who you are. On a Sunday night, Julia asked if she was happy. Claire thought for a long time. "I'm at peace," she replied. "I think that's better than happy." She put the dark bracelet in a drawer, not because she didn't need it anymore, but because she no longer needed to prove she wore it. At a cafe near Fifth Avenue, Claire met Matthew for a lunch with no agenda, no strategy, no plan. Just two people who learned, each in their own way. That truth has an expiration date, and that silence charges interest. Matthew said he still thought about that night, about what he would have done if he had spoken sooner. Claire said she thought about it too, but I think the answer, she said, isn't what I would have done. It's what I do now that no one is watching me. The ballroom was an ocean of light and silk. Tall chandeliers poured brilliance over hundreds of guests. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and the executives smiled at each other as if no smile there had a price. The sales group was celebrating 30 years, and the night had been designed to look flawless. Claire knew it was a lie. She saw Oliver enter through the central door with Bianca attached to his arm. Bianca's silver dress was made to reflect every flash, to capture every glance. Oliver led his mistress to Claire and whispered, with the smooth voice of someone who still believed he controlled the world, "You can still leave with some dignity, Claire." Bianca completed, sweet as poison. "Or you can stay and learn how a real woman accompanies a man like him." Claire held the glass without drinking. She looked at Oliver's hand gripping Bianca's, at the thin ring on the mistress's finger, too new, too expensive. And then she replied, low enough for only them to hear, hold her hand tightly, Oliver. Because when I step onto that stage, you're going to need someone to pretend they still believe in you. Oliver's smile faltered for a second. He leaned in, almost pressed against her ear. You don't have any stage tonight. Claire took a sip of water, not champagne, and said, your name is in all the wrong places. That's when Helena Stone approached. The matriarch wore dark blue, pearls around her neck, the posture of someone who never learned to ask, only to demand. She looked at Claire with the coldness of someone measuring a debt. I asked you not to turn this night into a shame. Claire replied without hesitation. Good, Helena, so did I. Oliver went up to the stage ahead of schedule, off the official script, and took Bianca with him. He announced, new phases. Spoke of leaving behind symbols that no longer represent our future. The guests turned their faces to Claire, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. He raised Bianca's hand like a trophy. Bianca's heart has been an important presence. Claire saw the thin ring shine under the light, and the silent question that had accompanied her for months returned with force. Paid for by whom? At the back of the ballroom, the young man in the tech booth touched his earpiece and made a nearly invisible signal. 20 minutes left. Matthew Reed approached, his face tense, his voice controlled. He changed the order of the speeches. I noticed. Do we need to move it up? We're still missing one piece. Bianca came down from the stage and walked straight to Claire, 2 glasses in her hands, the smile of someone who confused cruelty with elegance. You were very graceful. I would have cried in your place. Maybe that's why you should never be in my place. Oliver intervened, raised his voice to attract an audience. Not every woman was born to walk alongside a man who can't stop. The silence that followed was elegant, and for that very reason, more cruel than any booing. Claire didn't move a muscle, and then Oliver made the mistake. He asked for the microphone back and announced to the entire ballroom, Claire Mitchell Stone will no longer speak on behalf of our family. The murmur grew. Claire handed over the intact glass. She touched the dark bracelet on her wrist, thin leather, a metal piece the size of a fingernail, and felt the vibration, confirming the access was granted. I'm not leaving. The next speech is mine. Matthew extended his hand to her in front of the entire ballroom. Claire accepted. Together, they crossed the bridge built over months in the dark, stepped onto the stage, and Claire faced Oliver down below. Good evening. Before dinner, the sales group needs to hear about transparency. The golden screen trembled and showed special compliance report. The journalists raised their phones. Oliver shouted, cut that screen, now. The screen flickered, returned to gold. Relief passed across his face like a breath and died in the air. Thank you for demonstrating to the board how you handle any attempt at internal control. Matthew took the microphone. The request exists. It was filed within the group's internal rules. Oliver changed strategy immediately. Matthew, I don't know what she promised you, but there's still time not to get dirty. Helena Stone took control of the social situation. Called for dinner, ordered soft music, distributed smiles like someone placing bandages over an open fracture. Claire came down from the stage under stares. An old director looked away. A businesswoman pretended to check messages. A photographer captured the closeness with Matthew. In the side corridor, the whispers arrived. Revenge, always been too close. I should have spoken more, said Matthew. No. He needed to show first how afraid he was. In the service corridor, the young man from the tech booth appeared with a tablet in his hands. Mrs. Claire, they blocked the main mirroring, but the backup recorded the attempt to cut it. Thank you, Diego. You saw nothing beyond your job. Matthew looked at the ballroom door. He'll go after everyone who helped. That's why we can't reveal everything yet. Before bringing him down, we need to stop him from pulling innocents along with him. Claire returned to the ballroom to get her purse. Oliver was waiting for her, without Bianca, his face tight. "You've lost your mind. Tomorrow everyone will know about this. Tomorrow everyone will choose a version. That's different. You think a few spreadsheets will compete with the stone name? They're not spreadsheets. They're pathways." Oliver approached, his voice low and threatening. "If you keep going, I'll make sure everyone believes you and Matthew planned this because you had something to hide." Claire stared at him for a long second and replied, "You never could stand a woman who didn't cry on schedule." She turned her back and left the ballroom. Behind her, Oliver was still trying to understand what had just happened. But what he didn't know, what no one in the ballroom knew, was that the night wasn't over yet. The golden screen would return, and this time, no one would be able to cut it. The next morning arrived without mercy. Claire woke in her sister's small apartment in the West Village. Her phone vibrated on the wooden table, and the smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen before she even opened her eyes. First articles already spoke of a marital crisis at a corporate party. Photos of Oliver and Bianca entering the hotel radiant. Claire on stage next to Matthew. One portal insinuated a passionate dispute inside the sales group. Another went further. Sources close to the family accused Claire of using internal information after being removed from the company's institutional life. She read it all without shedding a tear. Julia appeared at the kitchen door, a cup in her hand, and the expression of someone choosing her words carefully. "Do you want me to break something? Or make cheese bread?" Claire replied without hesitation. "Today, cheese bread. Breaking things is what they expect from me." Julia sat across from her. "And what are you going to do?" Claire looked at the bracelet on her wrist. "I'm going to let them feel safe for one more day." At the sales group building on Wall Street, security received instructions before 9. Claire's badge was to be withheld until further notice. She arrived in light pants, a white shirt, and sunglasses. The supervisor, Renato, held the temporary card with both hands, like someone expecting it to burn. "Mrs. Claire, I received instructions." "From whom?" "From the presidency." "The presidency is under audit scrutiny." Renato turned red. I'm just following protocol." "Then follow another one. Document in writing that my access was blocked after a formal audit request, with the time, the name of who ordered it, and your signature of receipt." He hesitated. "This could get me in trouble." Claire softened her voice. "Not documenting could get you in more trouble." The sentence hung in the air. Renato looked at her, then at the card, then at the floor. She didn't need to shout. Her calm was heavier than any threat. That morning, Claire realized the fight had changed fields. It was no longer the party, the stage, the flashes. It was the paper. Every block, every refusal, every bureaucratic silence was a weapon she could turn into evidence. She remembered the 3 months of silence. Documents hidden behind polite smiles. Nights when Oliver kissed her forehead in the morning and diverted money in the afternoon. The truth capable of turning that elegant night into the beginning of his fall. The thin leather bracelet with the metal piece the size of a fingernail. Too discreet to interest women who measured value in diamonds. But it was the one that vibrated at the party, confirming the access was granted. Oliver didn't just want to betray her. He wanted to rewrite the story before she could tell it. The party, Bianca, the stage, all of it was an attempt to control the narrative. But Claire had the backup recorded by the tech booth. Diego, the young man in the black shirt, delivered the proof of the attempt to cut the screen. Oliver tried to silence the audit publicly and left the record of it. The strategy was clear. Let Oliver believe he won, that the public humiliation was enough, that Claire was isolated, defeated, finished. Every move he made against her now was a record. Every blocking order, every threat, every attempt to silence her. All of it became part of the dossier. The question Claire still hadn't answered. What exactly was in the special compliance report she was about to present? Matthew, on the other side of the city, was also preparing. Loyalty weighed like a poorly placed chain. Now he knew that his friendship with Oliver cost more than it was worth. The press started digging. Business journalists who once expected a domestic scandal now investigated the internal audit and the minority shareholders. Every wrong story was more pressure on Oliver. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from Matthew. He's moving the money. We need to act before he destroys the evidence. Claire replied, No, let him feel safe. Every step he takes now is a signature on his own sentence. She knew Oliver's downfall wouldn't be a scream. It would be an audit read aloud before the same people who applauded him that night. The door of the small apartment in the West Village closed behind Claire, but the world outside no longer saw her as the betrayed wife. It saw a woman who stepped onto the stage and didn't tremble. What she still needed to discover, and what Oliver feared she would, was exactly what was in that report, and how to use it without dragging innocence down with it. Claire revisits the 3 months of silence. Nights when Oliver kissed her forehead in the morning and moved money in the afternoon. A collection of broken promises she counted like a ledger of her own blindness. The discovery came by chance. A spreadsheet left open on the home computer. Numbers that refused to align. Transfers to companies she'd never heard of, each dressed in a name that meant nothing. She didn't confront him. Not yet. She needed to understand the size of the thing before she could name it. What she found was this. Oliver used company money to buy the lie he lived. Funds diverted from the group's institutional image fund, channeled to a consulting firm called North Arch, then to a shell company, then to payments that kept Bianca in the life she now wore as armor. The money meant to protect the company's reputation funded the woman beside him at every public event. The same woman who would later stand in the spotlight, while Claire was pushed to the margins as a symbol of the past. She stayed silent for weeks. Each silence was a week of gathering evidence. She learned to read the patterns, the dates that matched his trips, the invoices that never made sense. Matthew entered the story by accident. Oliver asked him to sign a document. Urgent, no time to read. Matthew read it anyway. What he saw changed everything. They'd been friends since university. Matthew was the best man at the wedding, the partner in the boardroom, the one who carried loyalty like a chain he never questioned. Now he understood that Oliver would use him as a shield if needed. He met Claire in secret. He's sinking the group, he said. If we do nothing, we all sink with him. Then we do it the right way, she replied. The plan took shape over 3 months. Claire filed a formal request for an internal audit with the minority shareholders. 3 months of preparation against a single night of public exposure. The special compliance report, the document she almost presented on that stage, contained the full trail, the transfers, the shell companies, the payments to Bianca, listed as institutional image consulting. The leather bracelet with the metal piece, the size of a fingernail, was never jewelry. It was a device that unlocked the audit files. Without it, the document stayed encrypted, sealed against any attempt at access. The vibration she felt that night at the party was confirmation that access had been granted. Diego's backup from the tech booth was the other piece. The recording of Oliver trying to cut the screen. The moment he tried to silence the audit in front of everyone. It proved he knew what was coming and tried to hide it. But Claire couldn't simply release everything. Oliver had threatened to drag innocents down with him. Employees who had no idea what was happening. Directors who signed what they were told. Even Matthew, if necessary. She needed to bring him down without destroying the company he had built, without staining the people who had done nothing wrong. The press began to sniff around. A business columnist called her phone. She let it ring. Speculation grew, and each inaccurate story increased the pressure on Oliver. Let them guess. Let them invent. Every wrong headline was another weight on his shoulders. Oliver acted with fury. Calls to lawyers. Attempts to block her access to everything. Threatening messages that she saved as evidence. Each one a small brick in the wall she was building. Helena tried to intervene. You've always been intelligent, Claire. Be intelligent now. Stay quiet. Ma'am, Claire said. You've confused silence with obedience. She understood then that the final battle would not be fought in courtrooms. It would be fought in public opinion, before the same people who had watched her humiliation at that party. The question she couldn't yet answer was how to turn the report into a weapon without becoming the villain in the story Oliver was writing. Then Matthew sent another message. He's moving assets offshore. We have 48 hours before the trail disappears. Claire looked at the bracelet on her wrist. She felt the vibration, the confirmation that the files were still there, still hers. The waiting was over. The next move had to be hers. 48 hours. That was all that stood between Oliver and the destruction of the evidence. 48 hours to decide how to use the truth without becoming the monster in his narrative. Claire closed her eyes. She knew what she had to do. She just didn't know yet if she could do it without losing herself in the process. Oliver adjusted his tie for one long second, then lowered his head and began typing. The first gate had closed, but it left a mark. Up in the glass-walled room, New York City seemed too small. The crisis meeting gathered the allies. Bianca sat beside him, which irritated two directors and amused others with the vulgarity of the boldness. On the table, coffee, water, tablets, and a draft statement ready to be distributed. Oliver set the narrative. Claire, emotionally shaken by the end of the marriage, tried to create instability using incomplete documents. Matthew had acted hastily out of old friendship with her, but he could still correct his position. The gray-haired advisor cleared his throat. What if there's a formal audit filed? Oliver shot a cold look. Internal requests come in all the time. Not every request becomes a crisis. That was when Bianca leaned in. Unable to resist the sense of power, she spoke with the lightness of someone who thinks she's contributing. The key is separating image from noise. An institutional image fund can cover the reconstruction strategy. A short silence fell over the table. Oliver turned to her with contained rage. Two directors' expressions changed at once. Institutional image fund was not a term for the mistress to repeat in a crisis room. It was the second time Bianca had let slip a door that should have stayed closed. The first had been at the party, when she mentioned the same fund, as if it were part of her vocabulary. Now, before the advisors, the word carried a different weight. It was no longer a slip. It was a symptom. Matthew arrived late without a tie, as if he had crossed the night without deciding whether he still belonged to that building. Oliver pointed to the empty chair. Sit and sign. On the table, a statement of institutional alignment. It claimed that the previous night's presentation had been the result of Claire's personal interpretation, without committee validation. Matthew read the first page. Then the second. Everyone waited. The memory of his father came without warning. The honest man who lost his job after covering for his friend, the company owner, believing loyalty was a noble way to die. Matthew felt the weight of that inheritance in his fingers. Oliver noticed the hesitation. You owe me more than silence. Matthew raised his eyes. I owe you many things. A signed lie isn't one of them. Bianca laughed nervously. Oliver set his hands on the table. Without my family, you'd be nobody in this market. The phrase cut through the room. Matthew closed the folder. Maybe. But without records, you won't be president much longer either. He didn't sign. And by not signing, he became a target. That afternoon, Claire and Matthew met in a small room of a shared office near Wall Street. far from the floors where surnames mattered more than contracts. The window faced tall buildings. Couriers cut through the traffic below. Claire spread only what was necessary on the table. Copies of protocols, records of blocked access, a sequence of payments, the name of a consulting firm that appeared in event invoices, image campaigns, and executive training. They'll say I stole this. Matthew shook his head. That's why every page needs to come from a source they can't contaminate. Claire mentioned that Bianca had spoken about the image fund in front of 2 directors. She closed her eyes for a second. It wasn't pleasure, it was confirmation. She wants to be recognized as part of the power. She'll talk more. Matthew watched her with painful respect. You knew Oliver would try to force me to sign? Claire answered without pride. I knew he'd try to turn your loyalty into shackles. It's what he does to everyone. At dusk, Claire's phone buzzed, unknown number. The message came short and broken. Mrs. Claire, forgive me, I can't help anymore. They're saying I was the one who leaked the files. A blurry photo showed a cardboard box on a work table. It was Lucy, the accounting analyst who had first noticed the duplicate payments. Claire's stomach clenched. Matthew saw her face change and took the phone. They started with her. Claire walked to the window. She watched the city light up in red lines of traffic. That was what Oliver did best when threatened. He chose someone smaller to bleed first. The first time since the party, the anger Claire had kept folded almost broke through. I should have said everything yesterday, Matthew answered quietly. If you'd spoken yesterday, Oliver would say Lucy fabricated the data on your orders. Now we have the retaliation on record. Claire turned, her eyes both wet and dry. She lost her job so I could have one more piece of proof. Matthew held her gaze. Then don't let it be in vain. That same night, Oliver sent the press an elegant, polished, poisonous statement. The Stone Group reaffirmed its commitment to governance, lamented the improper exposure of private matters, and announced a temporary review of access for people tied to sensitive information. Claire's name didn't appear, but everyone knew how to read absences written by lawyers. In Julia's apartment, Claire followed the statement in the silence of the living room. The dark bracelet on the table, the coffee cup already cold. Matthew sent only one message. He's closing the doors. Claire replied, let him. Closed doors also show who's locked inside. She switched off the screen and allowed herself, for a few seconds, to be the betrayed woman before the strategist returned. It hurt to know that the man who once promised to protect her now used his own empire to erase her. It hurt more to know that many people would believe him. But when Claire opened the audit file again, her face no longer trembled. Oliver had taken from her the stage, the badge, the reputation, and almost every visible ally. Still, he had made the mistake of leaving traces. Traces, unlike applause, didn't obey the Stone name. The next morning, she realized Oliver didn't just want to close doors. He wanted to erase the doorknobs. The statement opened the business news with the cowardly elegance of lawyer-crafted phrases: access review, institutional preservation, commitment to governance. But behind the scenes, the message was simpler and more brutal. Claire Mitchell Stone was being treated as a risk. In the apartment in the West Village, Claire watched her own name being avoided on business programs, as if an absence could be more accusatory than a headline. Julia turned off the television before the reporter repeated the word crisis a third time. You're not going to eat, Julia said. Claire looked at the untouched plate. Lucy must be hearing this too. The analyst lost her job because she saw what she shouldn't have, and now they'll say she made it all up because of me. Julia crossed her arms, indignant. Then release everything. Claire closed her eyes. It was the phrase any just person would say. It was also the phrase Oliver was waiting for. If I release it now, they'll burn Lucy, Diego, Matthew, and any employee who touched a file. I need to prove the crime, without handing over the people who tried to stop it. In the Wall Street building, Oliver steered the crisis like a man who still believed a glass table could hold any lie. He called an extraordinary meeting with selected advisors, loyal directors, and 2 legal representatives who spoke little but took too many notes. Bianca shouldn't have been there. And precisely because of that, she made a point of arriving before some executives. Light dress, thin folder in hand, the expression of someone who confused access with authority. Oliver noticed the uncomfortable looks, but didn't send her away. He needed her visible to prove his choice was firm. He needed her close, so he wouldn't admit that Claire's presence on that stage still trembled in his ribs. "Today we end the noise," he announced. "Claire will be formally removed from any strategic environment. Matthew will be invited to correct his posture. The public narrative will be handled by institutional image." An advisor asked cautiously, "And the audit?" Oliver set his hands on the table. "An audit without control becomes a weapon, and I don't hand a 30-year company to a resentful woman." Bianca smiled, small but seen. Matthew arrived when the phrase still burned in the air. He heard resentful woman and felt a shame that wasn't his, but seemed to stick to his skin. The legal director pushed a new draft, now more aggressive than the first. The document stated that Matthew had been induced by Claire to interpret financial records out of context, that he recognized no preliminary validity in the materials shown at the party, that he regretted any damage caused to the family. Oliver didn't look at him as a friend, he looked as an owner. "Sign, and I'll forget yesterday's theatrics." Matthew read the word induced and almost laughed. There was no more precise humiliation than being treated like a child by a desperate man. "You want me to say Claire manipulated documents that went through 3 levels of registration? I want you to remember who opened doors for you in this market." Silence wounds more than a threat. Matthew thought of his father, the lost job, the sold house, the phrase he'd heard so many times, "Son, never confuse gratitude with servitude." He pushed the draft back. "I remember. And precisely because I remember, I won't sign a lie." The refusal turned the meeting into a trial. An old advisor, a friend of Helena, suggested temporary removal due to conflict of interest. Another hinted that closeness to Claire compromised the audit's impartiality. Bianca, energized by the chance to seem strategic, added with poisonous sweetness, "Maybe the problem is less technical and more emotional." Everyone saw how he held her hand on stage. Matthew turned his face slowly. "You should be careful with what you call technical. Yesterday you mentioned the Institutional Image Fund as if you knew its structure." Bianca lost her composure. "Oliver tells me about projects. Couples talk. Couples also sign invoices." The room went still. Oliver slammed his palm on the table. "Enough." Matthew realized he'd hit too close to home. Claire was right. Bianca wanted recognition, wanted to be seen as part of the power, and that hunger made her talk. The problem was that the more she talked, the more dangerous Oliver became. Cornered men didn't accept falling alone. A meeting with Lucy happened at a discreet cafe near 5th Avenue. Claire entered through the side door and saw her sitting in the back, face pale, and a bag too big to seem casual. Lucy was in her early 40s, nails without polish, dark circles from someone who'd spent the night choosing between paying the rent and telling the truth. Claire sat down without ceremony. "You didn't have to come." Lucy held the cup as if seeking warmth. "I needed to look at you and know whether I risked my job for a person or for a couple's war." The question stung because it was fair. Claire pulled a thin folder from her bag, but didn't open it. "You risked it for a company that shouldn't punish someone for asking the right question." Lucy swallowed hard. "They said they'll sue me if I talk." "Don't talk to me about the content now. Talk about the process. Who asked when they asked? Who ordered the changes?" Lucy stared at her in fear. You don't want the files? Claire shook her head. I want you to stay clean. That's when Lucy cried, not from relief, from exhaustion. Mrs. Claire, people like us don't stay clean when people like them decide to get dirty. The meeting lasted no more than 20 minutes, but it was enough for Claire to confirm the worst. The retaliation against Lucy hadn't been improvised. Someone in finance had received orders to review old access logs, find any small error, any delay, any justification for termination on grounds of broken trust. It wasn't a punishment. It was a message, and the message had a sender. Claire left the cafe with the name of a middle manager noted in her memory and a heavy heart, for not being able to promise immediate protection. On the sidewalk, the traffic on Fifth Avenue crawled. Motorcycles weaved between cars. People with badges rushed by holding coffee cups. The city seemed indifferent to the moral fall of any empire, and maybe it was. New York had seen so many names fall. Her phone buzzed. Matthew called as soon as she got into the rideshare car. They want to formally remove me. Claire closed her eyes for a second. I figured. Bianca talked too much, but it's still not enough. She looked at her own reflection in the window. It's never enough when the one in charge controls the narrative. The car cut through the city in silence. Claire thought about Lucy, the middle manager, the folder she didn't open at the cafe. She also thought about the bank confirmation that still hadn't arrived. Without it, Oliver would sacrifice Lucy and Diego without blinking. With it, the truth would carry a weight that no reputation narrative could bear. Matthew sent another message. The board meeting is the day after tomorrow. He's going to try to legitimize the lie before the audit concludes. Claire read it twice. Then she replied with a line that seemed more for herself than for him. Then, we need to get there first. The car stopped at the light. Claire looked at the mirrored buildings of Wall Street, where the stone name still seemed untouchable. But she knew what lay beneath the glass. She knew the paths the money had taken. She knew about the institutional image fund, the Arco Norte consulting firm, the shell company, and the personal payments that ran through it all like an invisible thread. What was missing was the proof, a bank confirmation that connected every point without leaving room for doubt. Claire looked at the dark bracelet on her wrist, the same one everyone had mistaken for a discreet keepsake of an elegant woman. It held more than an access key. It held the promise that the truth, when it came, would come clean. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Matthew. It was a message from an unknown number with an attachment. Claire opened it slowly. What she saw made the air stop. The bank confirmation. From the account linked to the Arco Norte consulting firm, 3 transfers had left the institutional image fund, passed through the shell company, and ended in personal payments. Dates, amounts, digital signatures, all there. Claire didn't smile. It wasn't time to smile. It was time to understand that the proof she'd waited so long for had arrived, at the exact moment the board was preparing to bury the truth. She looked out the car window. The city kept moving, indifferent. But inside that folder, inside that attachment, the stone empire had just lost its mask, and Claire knew exactly where to use it. If you've made it this far, this story isn't over yet. Subscribe to follow the conclusion.